this is a trending topic in the world is mental health. And the title of the book has been very appealing to a lot of people. So it's just, I've seen some momentum there. It's just interesting to see the momentum because of that. It levels up authority. Not that speaking has its own authority that comes with it. Books do something for people. It makes them go, oh, it's very interesting. That's a momentum piece with brand building that I've seen. So.
Hey, Chandler Bolt here, and joining me today is Brittany Richmond. Brittany is a professional speaker on teen mental health. She's delivered a message. It's called Become an Overcomer to thousands of students nationwide. She also is the author of the new book. It's called Lies My Anxiety Has Told Me. If you're watching on the YouTube, hold it up. If you're watching on the YouTube channel, look at that beautiful cover.
Isn't it pretty?
My goodness, it even matches the background light you got going there.
I know, right?
That's impressive. But so that's her new book. It just came out. She also works with my friend Grant Baldwin over at the Speaker Lab, helping people get booked and paid to speak. So today we're going to be talking about her journey as a speaker, and journey from speaker to author, but then also talk about how you can get booked and paid to speak, book your first or your next speaking gigs. We're going to go deep on this topic. You've probably noticed that we've been going deep on this topic with a few people that I've had on the podcast lately. It's because it's so relevant for us and for my business specifically. I mean, this was about 5 million of our revenue last year. It'll be somewhere between 8 to 10 million this year of our revenue is from speaking and partnerships. And so we're just trying to learn everything we can. Hence, part of the reason Brittany's on the show today. So Brittany, welcome. Glad to have you here.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. I know we've partnered together a little bit before, so I'm really excited to dive deeper into this topic. Let's talk about all the things. So
I guess I was doing some digging in your background, and it looks like I didn't run a background check. Don't worry. But you started as a school counselor, is that right?
Yes. I started in the field of counseling and psychology at like middle school and high schools. So yeah.
Cool. So I think that's just a fun full circle thing. I mean, you probably talk about this all the time and I've just missed it, but from school counselor to speaking at schools,
Yes,
same kind of spot, but different stage. How did you get started speaking? What made you decide to say, all right, hey, this is something I think I actually want to do? And then how did you get your first opportunity or two?
Okay, so it's kind of a layered story, but I actually went into the field of counseling and psychology because of my own mental health struggles as a teenager. So I really wanted to continue to serve teens like at the age that I felt like I had no one, what a perfect segue into speaking and writing books and all the things, right? Like Rory Vaden says we're most powerfully positioned to serve the person we once were. And that is so wildly true in everything that we do. But I remember it was 2018 and working one-on-one with teens is great, but as a licensed mental health professional, at least in the state of Illinois, you're not allowed to talk about your own mental health struggles with like patients and clients and things. But I really wanted to formulate those relationships and those connections on a much deeper level to create impact and influence. So I was literally in my office in 2018. I literally Googled how to be a public speaker. Like that was not anything amazing, nothing about this. So, and then the Speaker Lab is actually what popped up that because it was 2018, there really wasn't a whole lot of, speaker training. And so I found the Speaker Lab. It was the first thing that popped up. I dove into the podcast. I bought the book, Grant's book off Amazon. And then I took a webinar with Grant and
Hold up, a book as part of the journey. I'm going to earmark that. You bought the book, then you signed up to work with them. Interesting. Yeah, there it is.
it's like it's all over the place. But yes, that's exactly the process. And then here we are. I years later, I do it full time. I do mostly teen conferences. I do a lot of schools also. But I do want to be clear for the people listening that like me being a former counselor really doesn't play a role in me getting booked and paid to speak. My entire speaking business was built off of cold leads. I don't lead with the fact that I was a counselor because I'm not out there in the capacity of a counselor. I'm sharing my story and what has worked for me, and I think that's really important to note for the audience too. So
Cool. And so how did you get that first opportunity or two? What did that kind of look like?
I'm super grateful for the process that the Speaker Lab has laid out because I really did focus on doing the steps necessary to grow the speaking business. Because what I was doing before I found the Speaker Lab and got all in the program is I was just emailing schools like crazy, 6 paragraphs, attaching videos and my website and all these things, and nothing was working, right? Like literally nothing was working. And I was like, how do people do this? Like, this is wild. And then, so when I found the Speaker Lab and really the simple systematic process of connecting with decision makers, which is really, and finding the low hanging fruit, which are the places that already book and pay speakers, versus convincing people to bring us in to speak, and connecting with other youth speakers, leaning on mentors. I mean, it really is about getting out there and trial and error. And like, honestly, Chandler, like I think one of the first gigs I ever got was in front of like 13 students. It was a tiny little breakout session at a conference. And I knew I wanted to keynote this conference the next year. So you got to pay your dues, right? I was like, I got to get in and just build those relationships. And I did. And that keynote was like a tipping point for my business that year, because it really is about, it could be the most random gig. It could be the most amazing thing, but it's all about who's in the audience, right? So it's like the right person was there. And then literally everything just kind of took off from there. And I'm so grateful that happened. But yeah, it was just a matter of just seeing, it was a free gig too. Like it was a first free, I had to get in that room. I had to build that relationship. And now, I've built a 6-figure business, and I'm so grateful for that. And it's just about consistency. And I can't stress that enough, is the process is simple, right? Like the things we do to build a business are simple things. The hard part is being consistent with them. So
That's really great. So how many speaking gigs did you say that you've done total up to this point?
ooh, total. Well, I like to stay between like 30 and 50 a year. So, I mean, if you kind of do the math, but that has scaled up. This year is looking more like 50, maybe 60. So, and we're already booking into 2025 now, right? So it's just what I love about it is you can do whatever you want with it, right? There are some speakers that, like, I met a speaker at NSA. She's like, I did 171 gigs in 2023. I'm like, 171? Like, I'm like, doing the math. I'm
That's
like, there's
nuts.
52 weeks in a year, like all
Yeah.
these, I'm just like, what's happening? But
It's every other day, pretty much.
wild, like just wild. And
Yeah.
so that's not me, but that is some people. So
Yeah. And so I guess now that you've done it, you've obviously got a bunch of experience speaking. We'll talk about that a little bit later in this episode. But why a book at this point? Like, what made you decide to write this book, and how does the book fit in with your speaking, with your business?
So what's interesting is I never really had a desire to write a book. Okay. It's like, that just seemed like folklore to me. Like it's just not something meant for Brittany Richmond. But one of the things I loved about working with Grant is, he's very much about, you can do it all. You just can't do it all at once. So when I got into speaking, I'm seeing what all these other speakers are doing, like digital products, coaching, consulting, books, all these different things, podcasts. And I'm like, all right, I should obviously be doing these things, right? Like, should I be doing these things? And Grant like really slowed me down. And he was like, the only thing you should focus on over the next few years is getting booked and paid as much as possible, like creating momentum, creating a name for yourself, getting known for what you do in your lane. And then when it's time to scale, like start listening to your audience and what they want. And I always love the fact that like someone said to me once, I don't remember who it was, they were like, just because you want to do this doesn't mean that's what your audience wants, right? So it was like, just because you want to do a podcast doesn't mean your audience wants to listen to one. So while I was out there, building the business, I was listening to what these teens were asking for. And to be honest, I had no idea that a book was on a teenager's radar or a decision maker's radar in my lane. Cause I'm like, these are students, they deal with textbooks all the time. They don't read, they're on social media. It's like, is this something they want? Well, turns out, yeah. And what having a book has done is, first of all, it levels up your authority as a speaker and people see you as more an authority, but there's an opportunity to level up your speaker fees here also, and then potentially get more gigs because of that. So there's a lot of really cool momentum. So it was just time. There was a tipping point and it was like, this is the tipping point. So
Cool. And it looks like the book just came out in March of this year. Have you
yes.
noticed any difference on the speaking side of things since
Yes.
then?
Yes. I mean, I've had people reach out and they're like, oh, we see you've written a book. And I'm like, oh, yes, I did. It's just wild. And I honestly think I've noticed some momentum in the book just on the sales side. Cause typically as a speaker, we don't actively think we're going to make millions off of selling our book on Amazon. That's not something that it's just more, this is meant to capitalize with the speaking engagements and, like I said, level up authority. So it's more about how you can utilize it to get more gigs than increase your speaker fees. But I've seen this like momentum with the book, and I honestly think it's because this is a trending topic in the world, is mental health, right? So, and the title of the book has been very appealing to a lot of people. So it's just, I've seen some momentum there, but
Hmm.
it's been wild.
Are you selling the book at events? Are you including it when people book you? Like, how are you kind of structuring that?
Both. I tried to negotiate it in the contract where they purchase a free copy, for everybody,
Hmm.
but they're purchasing it.
Hmm.
But there have been a few events that are like, we don't want to do that, but you can sell it there. Now,
Hmm.
I really struggle with the selling it to teenagers kind of thing. That's just something I need to work through, and like what that looks like. But yeah, it's been weird to, I even pitched it
Hmm.
to a decision maker before it even came out in March. I was like, listen,
Hmm.
because it was like a gig in like July. I'm like, got a book coming out, and they were like, a book? Like, we would love to
Hmm.
buy a copy for everybody. And I'm like, okay, great. And I'm like, I literally have no idea what I'm doing. Like, it's
Yeah.
not even in my hands yet. So,
Yeah.
but it's cool. It's very cool.
That's awesome. And so I would assume that when you're bundling that in, that increases the overall amount that you're getting per gig.
Oh,
You've got
yes.
your speaking fee, and then I know some speakers will say, "Hey, well, you've got your training budget, but then you also have this other budget that you can pull from." So it's like, "Hey, we're going to pull this 5 grand from your book budget, and we're going to pull this 5 grand from your speaker budget." So have you saw any of that with kind of what you're doing with your speaking?
Yes, and with, especially I've noticed at like schools, because a few schools have purchased books for their students, particularly like their leadership students, like student council or something, and they've pulled that from a different fee, like the student council fund or the
That's smart.
PTA or something.
Mm-hmm.
So, but at the conference level, a lot of conferences I speak at are grant funded, state or federal or something.
Mm-hmm.
So that's usually included in their budget, but I do include it as a line item in a proposal, and then they can decide whether they choose to. And it does
Oh, cool.
increase, yeah, it
That's
increases that
smart.
speaker fee
Hmm.
exponentially sometimes, depending on the size of the audience, right? So,
Yeah, that's really smart. I like that structure. And I'll say for anyone listening to this, and this might even be helpful for you, Brittany, as well, but there's a great episode on this podcast with Carlos Whitaker, great speaker, but he talked about how he structures his talks, how he sells books through the talk. Like it's just really, he goes super in depth. So that's always an episode that I point speakers to say, hey, listen to that episode with Carlos Whitaker. It's really, really solid. And just, yeah, all the process to sell books, because I think his structure is more so, I'm going to get booked to show up to this event. There might be 1,000 people there, and I'm going to be able to move 300 books at 15 or 20 bucks a pop. So that's, whatever that is, an extra a couple $1,000 added on the back end of that. So any other ways that you've seen the book benefit your speaking business? Like, have you got any inbound speaking requests it sounds like it's helping you raise your fee, bundling in books when you go speak. Any other benefits that you've seen?
yeah, I've noticed there's been a few decision makers, and this is interesting. And I feel like the other things are true, yes, but this was interesting. I have found some students actually give the book to decision makers. I have found momentum. So I've
Oh,
had a few inbound engagements, and I feel like that might be true of any lane, right? You have an audience member or, a professional hand off this book. It's been interesting. So there's been two events I've booked from students basically saying, hey, I read this book, you should bring this person in to speak. And I'm like, oh, that's, so it's basically your audience advocating for you, right? It's like referral. It's
yeah,
like referral business.
that's
It's
cool.
wild. It's wild. So
Yeah. That's cool. Let's you kind of talked about some ways that you've helped use the speaking to sell more books. Is there anything that you've done related to speaking around the launch, or any other things that you've done to use kind of the speaking that you're already doing to sell books?
it's I'm a huge fan. I'm kind of gonna pull a different side of that. I'm a huge fan of social, and I like to encourage, we see that a lot at the speaker lab, is people building brands on social media and like how they continue to build their brand as speakers. And I have found a lot of momentum on social because of the book. And so I just want to encourage people, like, you don't have to do social media, but that's one of the places I've seen momentum with it, is you're not just showcasing yourself as a speaker or this or that. You also have this authorship layer that now it's just interesting to see the momentum because of that. It's again,
Hmm.
it levels up authority. Not that speaking has its own authority that comes with it, but books do something for people. They're like, oh, I mean, it makes them go,
Yeah.
oh, it's very
Hmm.
interesting to see that. So that's a momentum piece with brand building that I've seen. So
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting. We say this all the time. If the root word of authority is author, you can't spell the word authority without the word author. So a lot
so
of
true.
times when people find out that you are an author, you become an authority in their mind, right? Because now they know that you're an author. I hope you're loving this episode so far. So if you're serious about writing and publishing your book, we would love to chat with you and help create a custom plan. All right. So all you need to do right now is go to selfpublishing.com/schedule. Schedule a 45-minute consultation with one of the experts on my team. All right. Let's implement what you're learning in this episode and let's see how we can help with your book. Go to selfpublishing.com/schedule. So you kind of shared about your journey of, okay, speaker to then after speaking a lot, publishing a book. I think a lot of our authors start with a book. Like that's the very first, it's the very, very first step. And then that kind of unlocks this authority and they say, hold up, interesting speaking. That's not something that I really ever considered, but now I see that this could be a great way to make more money. This could be a great way to sell more books. Like it really feeds them a lot of their goals. So let's get into the mind of that person, Brittany. What would be your advice for that person? And specifically, it's like, okay, I've published my book and I've never really spoken before. I want to book my first speaking gig. Like, what are the first steps that you recommend that people take, or how can people look at that?
Well, you wrote a book, so you obviously have a message that you want to share with people, right? To serve other people and help other people. So the first thing I would do is just make sure you identify who your primary audience is. Because even with a book, you have a primary, secondary audience, right? So who's the primary audience? Who are you speaking to? And then naturally, I feel like people would see a book and want to potentially bring you in as a panel or some sort of speaker because you are an authority, right? I think that's natural. We see that a lot of times with really big people in the personal and professional development space. But if you're actively seeking out paid engagements, that's why I think drilling down your audience and going where your audience is, right? Like searching, seeking out places where that particular avatar is in attendance. And I would look at, like we said earlier, the low hanging fruit options, like the conferences, the associations, the summits, places that actively, consistently bring in speakers and then connect with those decision makers. And honestly, one of the best ways to connect with a decision maker at those places is to mail your book to them, right? Like mail the book in. I mean, snail mail is making a comeback, friends. It really, really is. And I have literally, let me tell you what I've done before. I've literally did this like last month in April when I got the books. I mailed a this is so dumb. You're gonna be like, Brittany, what is going on? I sent a book because I've been trying to get a hold of this decision maker for like 2 years. Like just so I want to speak at this event so bad. So I mailed the book and then I mailed a little baby like shoe, like a shoe. And I
Mm-hmm.
literally wrote a note that said, now that I've got my foot in the door with you, like I
Mm-hmm.
literally said that. I like put the little shoe in there. And I was
Mm-hmm.
like, this is my book. I've been, I'm really excited to potentially speak at your event. Please read it. So the snail mail is making a comeback because that person has emailed me, friends. So
Are you
I'm just like,
serious?
yes, yes, I'm very excited to let's just hope they love me enough to bring me in to speak, right? So
It would at least got you an at bat where it's, you said you previously hadn't got a response.
nope, no responses
Wow.
whatsoever. Yep.
So that's
And
a great point. And I'm so aligned with that. My advice to authors is take your book everywhere and give it away everywhere, right?
yes,
Instead of, people think about having a 50-cent business card. This is a $4 business card that people keep. They don't throw it away, unlike your business card, right? But they're going to keep this. And every time they see it, it's in their home, it's in their office, they think of you, right? And so whether you're showing up to events, showing up to masterminds, showing up to, we give the book away everywhere. I give the book away everywhere. People come to my house, whatever. And it's just all the time. Yeah, here's a book. And because you'll just be amazed at how much word of mouth it sparks. And then and we can circle back to that maybe later about using books to convert more revenue from speaking gigs. I don't know if we've talked about this, but we use my book. That is the prime catalyst. We typically do about 30 to 75 grand per event in sales. And it starts with the book. So we can talk about that later if you want. But it's So that's a big part of our process. But then to your point, using it to even get your foot in the door and sending it to decision makers. And there's something that they talk about in it's called lumpy mail, right? That's kind of the concept that you used, which is it's very similar to what you said. It's when you're sending mail. First off, most people don't get it, so they're probably going to open it. But if you're sending it to someone who's a big decision maker, they probably get a lot of mail. And so
Mhm.
if you put something in the package that's lumpy,
Yeah.
like a package, it gets put on the top because you can't put stuff on top of it, otherwise it falls off, right? And
Yes,
so
that's
the,
genius.
the shoe, the foot in the door, you can, some people will do like a little mini trash can. It's like, hey, you're throwing away money if you don't listen to this, or if
Love
you're
that.
throwing away money if you don't book me for your next event or whatever, right? And so it's just like, hey, any type of cheap trinket that makes the mail lumpy, that then you can tie into the note, boost your response rate by a lot. So use the book, maybe even some lumpy mail to get in front of decision makers. So, all right, I've used that book. Like, what are other tips for people who want to? I'm talking to the person that hasn't yet. Maybe they've done a speaking gig or two. Like, how do I really book those first few? Do you recommend starting local, speaking that way? Do you recommend, I'm assuming, probably doing some free speaking gigs first, then charging for them later? Like, what are kind of some of the other first steps that you guys teach?
Well, so there are certain things that I would definitely make sure were in place before I even started connecting, because a book is great. A book definitely levels up authority, but if you're serious about wanting to continue to get momentum in the speaking space, then certain things are going to be asked for by decision makers, like speaking websites and demo reels and things like that. And if you don't have those things, people aren't going to take you as seriously as a paid speaker for the long term, right? So I'm not saying that you can't start, because start with what you have and where you are, right? Definitely. And I have to assume if you have a book, you might have some sort of landing page or, some sort of platform to direct people to. I would just definitely add speaking as something that you do, because eventually people are going to look you up. People deep dive on people all the time, right? That's what we do. And if they see that you don't speak professionally, then they're going to question whether they want to put you on stage, because at the end of the day, an event planner and decision maker wants to look like the hero of the event. They don't want to look stupid and put someone up there that's never done this before, or maybe that's not what they do, right? Like they just don't want to do that. So I would definitely level up your marketing materials and include the fact that you do professional speaking. And with that, you can do a lot of free opportunities at your alma mater. I always tell people, I'm like, reach out, use your warm market,
Oh, cool. That's
speak for
smart.
teams. Yeah, high
Mm-hmm.
schools, colleges, even if that's not your lane, utilize it for footage or
Mm-hmm.
pictures or testimonials, or,
Mm-hmm.
just to give back to your community. There's so many different ways to do that. And I'm not saying you ever should do a free gig, because in some, like, you may not get paid monetarily, but I definitely think that there are things you can acquire that can consistently move the business forward, like
Mm-hmm.
referrals or testimonials, photos, video, things like that. So I would always
Mm-hmm.
negotiate something. But I definitely think that reaching out to your alma mater, chamber of commerces are really good because
Yep.
they hold meetings annually.
Mm-hmm.
But again, utilizing your warm market, even within your business or your job, are there team meetings you could lead, potentially
Mm-hmm.
to kind of at least get the reps in, right? And then
Cool.
to build those relationships, because the speaking industry is such a relationship business. How are you going to formulate those connections if you don't get out there and just start doing it? So,
That's great. I love leaning into the warm market or your warm network and local community. I mean, even there's just so many examples. Like I was in Boy Scouts growing up. It's like, oh, cool. Boy Scout meetings, stuff like that. There's all kind of local church. Okay, let me go speak. Just getting in the reps,
yeah.
we talked about this in the challenge that we did together.
Hmm.
Is getting footage. And
Hmm.
that's so. I remember you saying that. Hey, this is just so important. Is to start to create your speaker reel
Hmm.
where if you got those reps, all right, now you got footage, now you're more credible. To your point, that's something that event planners can see and say, oh, hold up, okay, Brittany's legit, let's bring her in to speak at our event, right? I want to ask one more question on the book and speaking tie-in, and then I want to do a little case study workshop here.
Okay.
So any other tips on for authors on how they can use their book to get booked for speaking gigs? Totally fine if you don't. I mean, I know the main one is probably the snail mail thing that you talked about, but anything else you can think of there?
I think a lot of it has to do with like overcoming the mindset of imposter syndrome. So I hear it from speakers who want to be authors and authors who want to be speakers, really anybody that wants to step into a space that they feel like is the next step for them, but they've never really done it, or they're like, am I really the authority? So there's a lot of like mindset that needs to be overcome there. So I just want to challenge the people who are authors who want to step into the speaking spaces. You wrote a book, friend, like you're there, like you are the authority. Speaking just feels different, but it's very much just continuously solving the problem that you wrote about with the solution you provided. You're just delivering it on another medium, and it's still about serving the audience. So I just challenge you. You're there. Let's get on stage. Let's go. So
Love it. Well, hey, so I want to do a little case study here with selfpublishing.com. So just I'll set the backdrop, and then, I want to get your advice.
okay.
So this is the selfish part of the interview that I hope and think will be very valuable for people who are listening. So we've talked about a lot of beginner, a lot of get your first 5, 10 gigs, etc. So selfpublishing.com, we've got a team of speakers. I am one of them. I speak at the biggest events that we do. And then we have probably, gosh, at this point, probably 5 to 7 speakers that will speak at smaller events. So like a couple weekends ago, we were speaking at 3 events. I wasn't at one of them, right? It's been a really fun, really fun thing to do. And we will come in and we'll have a booth. We'll sometimes be a sponsor. But we've got kind of a company talk that we can give that's super valuable. We've got great speakers, all that stuff, right? So that's kind of setting the stage. We'll do about probably 8 to 10 million from that this year. And we want to scale it beyond that. And so really, there's a couple questions that I'm thinking through, and a couple of bottlenecks that we have. The main one is just building pipeline, right, of events. There's obviously it takes a little salesmanship too, where Pedro and Peter and the team, I mean, when they get on the phone with someone, it's like, oftentimes they will want to book me, but I might not be available. So it's kind of the model of, okay, you can book Chandler for 10, 20 grand, or you can book one of our speakers, we'll waive our speaking fee, like that sort of thing. So that's how we're trying to position it. Sometimes it'll be a straight up sponsorship. So it's like, hey, let's do a sponsorship, and included as part of that is one of our speakers gets to give a talk. That's more of what we have to do with our kind of speakers that don't really have a name for themselves. So it's the event organizers like, well, hold up, why would I book them, right? So that's kind of like, that's how we're doing it currently. So I would say the biggest bottleneck is probably pipeline. So if you were us, how would you go about that, improving the pipeline so that we can book the team to speak at more events?
Gosh, I mean, the credibility of the organization probably speaks volumes, though, like self-publishing school in general. I mean, I think about like the Maxwell organization, he doesn't go out and speak for less than like 100 some K, right? But like his team goes out all the time and speak. It's all about the quality of the content with the pipeline, in my opinion. Like that's just the opinion of Brittany, is like the content is what is going to move all of that forward and get into the referral with the pipeline, because even it's no different than like being an individual speaker, right? Like you got to build those relationships and get into that referral space. But really, again, going where the audience is, there are so many places where people are authors, and it's not just in like what I would say would be like the obvious audiences, like speakers and coaches and consultants and things like that. I think there's opportunities. The thought leadership space is massive, and it's in a lot of different lanes. Like I said, there's so many organizations that, even from the speaker lab perspective, our pipeline in general, we see the most success at events where it's not speakers or authors,
Right. Yeah,
So
for sure. We
testing the
see stuff
market.
similar.
Yeah.
How do you look at prospecting? Because I think one of the things for us is we're like, how do you even find these events? There's so many events, but if we don't know about them, we can't reach out to them, right? And so one thing we would like to do is book me for more events in Austin, Dallas, Houston, where I can be out and back in a single day. But it's kind of like, okay, well, how do we find all the events in Dallas? How do we find all the events in Austin? Even stuff like that. How do you look at prospecting? Are there any good tools? Is there any good software? Is there anything that you recommend on that side of things?
Well, geographical prospecting, which is what you're referencing, right? Like just in the area. I mean, a lot of that, again, I would utilize the warm market that you have in the area to make those connections. But there's this really cool tool called Google. That's why I tell people, I'm like, Google's great. But in terms of prospecting for speakers, there's this tool called Intel Engine. It's a really great search engine that basically was created for speakers. We utilize it here at the Speaker Lab too.
Interesting.
And it's an excellent, I believe it's like a monthly subscription, I believe. I'm unsure. You have to check on that. Don't quote me, but there's the Intel engine is wild because you can do that kind of geographical prospecting directly in there. And yeah, that's one of the things I would definitely look
Mm.
at. So
Okay, that's Intelngin.
I believe so. Intel
Like
engine. Yeah.
intel, like it's like intelligent or something. Is what it looks like.
I'll send you
Okay.
a link.
Oh, I see. Professional speakers. Yeah. Okay.
There you
Look, this is great. Yeah. Okay. Cool. So that's a really good tip. Are there any other databases that you know of that you use for prospecting, or
go.
even I know some people would look at associations or stuff like that. Any other kind of databases that you use?
There's some platforms out there like Speaker Hub and Speaker Match, and like there's different organizations where you can actually put yourself on there when people can come look for different speakers and things like that. There's obviously bureaus that if and when it's right for somebody to do that. Agents are also a thing. But I really like looking where other speakers that speak on similar topics as I do, or just similar audiences as I do, like where have they spoken at? Like that's such an underrated way to prospect, in my opinion, because you won't believe how many times I see one of my friends pop up on Instagram. I'm like, where'd they speak at? I'm gonna screenshot that. That's a lead for me. You know what I mean? So I think that really utilizing where others speak, because here's the thing, friends, like if people are speaking there, chances are they're not going to speak there next year, right? Like they're not going to bring the same speaker back year after year, typically. So there's so much opportunity there as well. So definitely paying attention, to where
I
other
like
people
that.
are speaking at.
That's super smart. All right, so we got an Intel engine, we've got Speaker Hub, we got Speaker Match, and then looking at other places where people are speaking. That's
Mm.
great. I'm taking notes. I'm sharing this with our speaking team. I'm like, all right, come on, here we go. Okay, so we got so that's how we think about the pipeline. So then, because I look at it almost like, okay, how do we get in front of more decision makers? Like so we got to know about the events. So we've got to do research and then prospecting and then get in front of those folks. And then obviously there's the moment of truth of, are they going to book us?
Mhm.
So I guess one more question on that, and then I would talk about maybe maximizing fees and stuff like that. Would be and I guess this is kind of like the holy grail. And you probably get asked this all the time, but like, if you were us, what would you do to get more inbound speaking requests?
More inbound. That's going to
Mhm.
be really wrapped around content, because because what happens when you experience something great? You tell everybody. That's how inbound prospect. I mean, it's very simple. It's not easy, but it's very simple, right? And that's wrapped around how good the content is. So it comes down to, is this relevant to your audience? Are you solving the problem that they have? But here's another way, and this is more of like a marketing tactic, but truly, I mean, utilizing social, paid ads, getting yourself in front of your ideal customer. I mean, there's so much power in the world of marketing right now, and video marketing is like the number one marketing that you could possibly do. And being speakers, what a great opportunity to do that, right? So with that and like the branding side, if you want to lean into social, I always tell people, I'm like, you need to find the platform that first of all you like, okay, leaning into, but two, like where are your decision makers at? Because you're really marketing to a decision maker, not an audience member, because those are two different things, right? So that's really interesting about speakers too, is we market and speak to two different things. We market to a decision, like I market to decision makers, not teenagers, right? So my marketing has to be directed at them, not
Mm,
the teenagers. So it's just a little bit different in how you market, but definitely inbound comes from referrals and just being really good and establishing yourself as the authority. Momentum is real in the space. So
cool. That's good. And so let's talk about maybe the final piece, the moment of truth of like, okay, we've got in front of this person. How can we negotiate better rates? And I think sometimes because we are booking for our speaking team, it's like we almost use the sponsorship as the carrot, but then it's like, okay, cool. Now you're in the sponsor bucket. And so you're going to pay premium sponsorship pricing versus I'm looking at you as a speaker and, oh, sure, we can have a booth. So like, what's your advice of just navigating that in a way that gets a response? But then, we will typically, either do a free gig, but include a booth. And because that's how, I mean, we'll do 30 to 75 grand, sometimes 100K plus from these events. It's like, that's very much worth it. Even paying a small sponsorship is worth it in a lot of cases, but it just kind of depends on the event. So what's your advice on how you would navigate that process and get better terms?
Discovery calls are really good. I think discovery calls are really important. But I mean, truly, I mean, not being afraid of asking, like, what's the budget for speakers? I know that sounds very simple and kind of like bare bones. It's like what your question is. But first of all, we don't know what they're paying. We don't know if they even pay. So we need to ask, and make the ask for the speakers, but also demand, right? I think it's totally okay to say, I don't show up for less than this. I mean, you have your rates, Chandler. I have my rates. Your team has their rates. I mean, it's just honoring that is really important, because at the end of the day, people will pay for a specialist, not a generalist. And when people come at me and say, well, we don't have money, it's like, no, I know you have money. Like, you know what I mean? Like, look at your organization, friends. Like, it's just about finding the money. So, but that's the specialization. So when you specialize in something, you're able to charge for that, right? And I think that's okay. I think a lot of people struggle with that, and people also take advantage of that because they're like, oh yeah, bring you in. We'll do this and this instead. Like, does it move the business forward? Maybe. I don't know. It's up to you to decide if it does. But what's the ROI for you? So I would just challenge everybody, people book and pay specialists, not generalists. So are you specializing in something or not? So
Yeah, and I love that ask. Hey, what's your budget for hiring speakers for
yes,
this event? So just say that as a starting point. It completely shifts the frame.
yeah, because if you
It's
don't
smart.
ask, they're not going to just willingly be like, hey, yeah, we pay our speakers 10K, per talk. It's like, because if you're leading with the fact, you're like, yeah, I'll do nothing, I'm just going
Yeah.
to do, if you're wishy-washy about it, they're not going to argue with you. Like, so.
Yeah, that's good. Well, cool. Brittany, what would be your parting piece of advice for authors who want to get booked and paid to speak? Knowing what you know now, doing this a bunch of times, and then now being on the other side of the table as an author, you've kind of got both perspectives. What would be your parting piece of advice?
Not a whole lot of perspective from the authorship side, not yet, but a little bit, just a little bit. To realize that, again, you are the authority. You've already done half of the equation. Now it's just a different medium, right? It's just a different medium. It's the same message. It's the same. And I think a lot of people with books, they're like, how do I write talks? How do I do this? How do I shop my message around? It's like, you have the message, you have the talk written, it's in here. It's just a matter of, putting it together. But really, I would just say the imposter syndrome side, Chandler, honestly, because that's the mental block I see with this half and half. Authors are afraid to step into speaking because they're like, I wrote a book, so because I'm not good at public speaking, or people won't care if I'm on stage, or, well, they're buying the book. They care about what you have to say, and vice versa, right? Like, I see it on the other side too. So just challenging your mindset, because I really do think that is such a huge part of the equation with anything that we do in this space with thought leaders. So it's like, just go, just get out there, just do the things. So
That's good. I'm taking more notes over here. I got a whole bucket of notes. This has been awesome, Brittany. We're going to use this. I hope people listening, watching this, I hope that you implement this with your books and in your business, because this podcast, this was likely going to be worth at least a few $100,000, if not $1 million plus for our business. So implement it, implement it. Brittany, where can people go to get your book, to find out more about you, the Speaker Lab? Like, where's the best place to send people?
Oh gosh, well, I'm going to give you two websites. I'm going to give you mine, BrittanyRichmond.com, super on the nose. On there, you can find all my information, all the things, where to buy my book. It's on there as well. Demo reels, all the fun things. So utilize it as inspiration to build your own marketing materials, right? Because I was from the Speaker Lab, friends, and the Speaker Lab is at thespeakerlab.com. And like I said, we help people get booked and paid consistently and build the business of speaking. So whether you're interested there or here, you can reach out to me on either platform. So
cool. Brittany, you're awesome. Congrats on the new book. Thank you.
I appreciate you.
Thank you so much for watching or listening to this episode of the Self-Publishing School podcast. I know there's so many places that you could be spending your time. There's other podcasts that you could be listening to, YouTube channels that you could be watching. So thank you so much. It means the world. Now, I want you to do 3 things right now if you found this episode helpful. I don't know if you know this, but we've got a YouTube channel. It's a companion channel to this podcast. All the video versions of the episode are on the YouTube channel. So number one, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Number two, if you're listening to this podcast wherever, whether this is Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Number two, I want you to subscribe to this podcast right now so you don't miss a future episode. And then number three, this is probably the most important, leave a review on the podcast. All right, reviews are super important and help this podcast get discovered by other people. So number three, leave a review on the podcast. Thank you so much. I'll see you in the next episode.